The late afternoon sun blazed down on the streets of Manila as Manny Pacquiao's car rolled slowly to a stop in front of a small, weathered auto repair shop. The sign above the garage door was faded, its paint peeling after years under the tropical heat. To most passers-by, it looked like just another struggling neighborhood shop. But to Manny, the moment would soon become unforgettable. Dressed in casual jeans and a plain shirt, Manny had chosen to personally bring in one of his vehicles for a quick checkup. He often liked to blend in with the people, avoiding the pomp and fanfare that usually surrounded his public appearances. As he stepped out of the car, the smell of oil, grease, and gasoline filled the air. Sparks from a welding torch flickered somewhere deep inside the garage, accompanied by the rhythmic clanking of tools. A mechanic emerged from under a rusted sedan, his hands blackened with grease, his shirt soaked with sweat. His shoulders were bent from years of hard work, and his face carried the lines of exhaustion. For Manny, it was a face that struck him like a punch he never saw coming. He froze. His heart skipped a beat. That face, those eyes, they were familiar. Not just familiar, unforgettable. It was Jun, his childhood best friend. Memories came flooding back instantly. The two of them as barefoot kids, running through the dusty streets, throwing playful punches at each other with makeshift gloves, dreaming about a future far bigger than their little village could offer. They had shared meals when there was barely enough food, whispered secrets about their dreams at night, and promised each other they would escape poverty together. Yet here he was. Years later, Manny, now a world champion and senator, staring at his friend who was still trapped in the same cycle of struggle. Jun hadn't noticed him yet. He kept wiping sweat from his brow, muttering under his breath about a stubborn bolt. His boss shouted from the back, demanding he hurry up. Manny's chest tightened. It felt surreal, a collision of past and present in the most unexpected of places. How could one of the world's richest and most powerful athletes find his childhood brother still struggling to survive? Fixing cars for scraps? Manny stood frozen for a moment, watching Jun hunched over the engine. The clink of metal on metal echoed through the garage, and for Manny, each sound seemed to strike a chord buried deep in his memory. It was as if the years melted away, and he was no longer a world champion standing in a mechanic's shop. He was a barefoot boy again, running through the dusty streets of General Santos City with his best friend at his side. Back then, life had been unbearably hard. Their families lived in poverty, struggling for every meal. Sometimes dinner was nothing more than rice with salt, or a single piece of dried fish split between siblings. Yet even in those desperate times, Manny and Jun had a way of finding joy. They would turn empty rice sacks into makeshift kites or old rags into boxing gloves. Jun had always been the clever one. If a toy broke, he fixed it. If they wanted a ball but couldn't afford one, he'd gather rags, tie them with string, and make something they could kick around until sunset. Manny remembered those evenings clearly. Jun laughing loudly as they played, sweat dripping from their foreheads, both of them pretending they were destined for greatness. One night stood out in Manny's mind. The two boys had been lying under the stars, their stomachs empty, their bodies tired from the day's labor. Manny had whispered, "Someday I'll be a world champion. I'll fight my way out of this." Jun had smiled, brushing dirt from his cheek. "And I'll be there, brother. Maybe not in the ring, but I'll always be in your corner." That promise had burned itself into Manny's heart. They were more than friends. They were brothers forged in struggle. But then life took its sharp turns. Manny left home as a teenager, chasing boxing matches in the city, fighting for a few pesos a night. He slept on gym floors, skipped meals, and took beatings from men far stronger than him. But he kept fighting, kept climbing. Slowly, painfully, he made his way to the top, until he wasn't just Manny from the slums anymore. He was Manny Pacquiao, the people's champion. Jun's path, however, had been different. Without money for schooling or connections, he stayed behind. He took odd jobs, carrying sacks in the market, fixing bicycles, working in tiny garages just like the one Manny stood in now. He had been left behind in the shadows while Manny stood in the spotlight. As these memories flooded back, Manny's chest grew heavy with emotion. He remembered the last time he had seen Jun, a brief farewell, both of them too young to understand how long life's roads could stretch. "Write to me," Jun had said, but letters never came. Poverty had stolen even the ability to keep in touch, and now, after decades of silence, here Jun was. Grease on his hands, sweat dripping down his face, shoulders bent under the weight of survival. Manny blinked hard, swallowing against the lump in his throat. He wanted to rush forward to embrace June, to shout, "Brother, it's me!" But something held him back. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the fear of seeing disappointment in his friend's eyes. After all, Manny had achieved everything they had dreamed of together. Wealth, power, global recognition. Yet Jun was still here, living in the same kind of struggle they had once vowed to escape. The contrast was brutal. Two boys had once stood side by side, united by hunger and hope. Now one was among the most powerful men in the Philippines, and the other was tightening bolts for minimum wage. Manny's hands clenched into fists at his sides, not in anger at Jun, but at the injustice of life itself. He whispered under his breath, "Why him, Lord? Why not me? Why is he still suffering?" The shop's fluorescent light flickered above them, buzzing faintly. Jun stood up, wiping his brow with a dirty rag. He still hadn't recognized Manny, his eyes too focused on the next task. For Manny, the moment was unbearable, a mixture of joy at seeing his brother again and sorrow at the state of his life. Two boys had shared the same dream, but fate had lifted one to glory and left the other in struggle. What would Manny do now that destiny had brought them face to face again? Jun stood up from under the hood, wiping his greasy hands on an old rag. The sound of tools clattering and engines humming filled the cramped garage. A faint radio played a static-filled tune in the corner, but it did little to brighten the atmosphere. The place smelled of gasoline and sweat, of exhaustion and long hours. Manny, still unnoticed, leaned against a post, watching silently. His chest ached. It was almost surreal. The same boy who once dreamed of freedom, now trapped in a cage made of wrenches and grease. "Jun," a harsh voice barked from the back. The garage owner, a stocky man with a cigarette hanging from his lips, stepped out, scowling. "How long does it take to fix one car? Customers don't wait forever." Jun lowered his head. "Yes, sir. Just a few more minutes." His tone was respectful, almost submissive, though Manny could hear the fatigue in it. The boss shook his head and muttered, "Always too slow. If you weren't so cheap, I'd fire you already." Manny's fists clenched instinctively. Every fiber in him wanted to step forward, to tell the man who Jun really was. Not just some mechanic, but a survivor, a fighter, a brother. But he stayed silent. This wasn't the moment. Instead, he watched as Jun bent back over the engine, his movement steady but weighed down by years of toil. His shirt clung to his back, stained beyond repair. His shoes, cracked at the soles, looked ready to fall apart. Yet despite the hardships written across his body, there was still a dignity in the way Jun worked. His hands moved with precision, his eyes focused, his spirit unbroken, though clearly bruised. Manny's mind drifted. He thought about the mansions he owned, the cars he drove, the arenas that cheered his name. And then he looked back at Jun, scraping by just to survive. The guilt returned, sharp and unrelenting. How many times had he told himself he'd never forget where he came from? How many speeches had he given about helping the poor, lifting up those in need? And yet here was his very own brother left behind. Jun finally looked up, reaching for a bottle of water. His face was older now, lines etched deep by hardship. But in those tired eyes, Manny still saw the boy he once knew. The boy who had shared stale bread with him, who had patched up his cuts after street fights, who had believed in him when no one else did. "Papa!" A small voice suddenly rang from outside the shop. Jun turned quickly, a weary smile breaking across his face. A little girl no more than 8 years old came running in, her school uniform slightly frayed. She threw her arms around Jun's legs. "Papa, I finished school early today." Manny's heart squeezed. Jun had a daughter. Jun knelt down, wiping his greasy hands carefully before touching her hair. "That's good, Anak," he said softly. "Go sit in the corner. Papa will be done soon." The girl nodded and found a seat on a small wooden bench. She pulled out a notebook, her shoes just as worn as her father's. She smiled brightly despite the world she was growing up in. Manny felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't just Jun who was struggling. It was his family too. A family living on the edge day after day. The garage boss noticed the girl and sneered. "Hey Jun, I told you not to bring kids here. This is a workplace, not a daycare." Jun bowed his head again. "I'm sorry, sir. She just came to see me. It won't happen again." The boss shook his head and stormed off, muttering insults. Manny could hardly contain his anger. He wanted to shout to put the man in his place, but he stayed still, his cap pulled low, observing. Because more than anger, he felt something else, a heavy responsibility. Here was Jun, the brother he'd once promised never to leave behind. And yet life had taken them down two different paths. One toward fame and fortune, the other toward grease and survival. Manny whispered under his breath, almost a prayer. "Forgive me, Jun, I should have been here sooner." How would Manny Pacquiao, a man of immense power and wealth, make things right for the brother who once carried him through poverty? The little girl sat quietly in the corner of the garage, humming to herself while drawing in her notebook. Jun returned to the car, crouching low under the hood again, his hands steady despite the sweat dripping down his temples. Manny stood there, still half in disbelief. Years of fame and fortune had carried him far from these streets, yet now he was face to face with a piece of his past he thought was long gone. He stepped closer. The sound of his shoes on the concrete floor caught Jun's attention. Jun glanced up briefly, wiping his brow, but his tired eyes didn't linger. To him, Manny was just another customer waiting for his car. "Sir, it'll take a while longer," Jun said respectfully, his voice carrying both humility and weariness. "The engine's a bit tricky," Manny nodded, his voice low. "I can wait." He stood quietly for a moment, studying Jun's every movement. Each gesture, each habit, it was all the same as when they were boys. The way he pursed his lips in concentration, the way his brows furrowed when he focused, even the way he muttered under his breath. Manny wanted to speak, to reveal himself, but he knew blurting it out would shock Jun too much. Besides, Jun had been beaten down by life. Would he even believe him? So Manny tried something else, something only Jun would understand. He picked up a small wrench lying nearby, turning it in his hands. Then he tapped it gently against the metal beam beside him. Once, twice, 3 times in a very specific rhythm. Clink, 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 clink. Jun froze. His head shot up, his eyes narrowing. That sound, that pattern, it was a code they had invented as children. A secret knock they used to call each other when they played hide and seek in the back alleys of General Santos. For a moment, Jun just stared at Manny, confusion flickering across his face. His lips parted as if to speak, but then he shook his head, dismissing it. No, it couldn't be. The idea was too impossible. Manny's lips curved into a faint smile. "Been a long time since I've heard that sound," he said softly, his voice calm but loaded with meaning. Jun's hands stilled on the engine. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing at the man before him. His mind raced. The cap, the casual clothes, the quiet confidence. Something about this customer wasn't ordinary. But no, it couldn't be. Not him. Jun let out a nervous laugh. "That's funny. Only one person ever used to do that knock." Manny tilted his head, meeting his gaze. "And what did we call it?" Jun's breath caught. The garage seemed to fade away, the noise of tools and engines dimming into silence. His eyes widened as memories came rushing back. 2 boys crouched behind an old fence, giggling as they tapped that very rhythm to signal safety. They had called it their brother's code. Jun stepped back, his rag falling from his hand. His chest tightened, his heart pounding faster with each second. He whispered, almost afraid of the answer, "No, it can't be. Manny?" Manny removed his cap slowly, revealing his face fully for the first time. The fluorescent light flickered above, casting shadows across his features. But there was no mistaking those eyes. The same determined eyes that had stared down opponents in rings all over the world. The same eyes Jun had once seen, filled with hunger and hope. Jun staggered back, his knees almost giving way. "It's you." "It's really you." Manny nodded gently, his smile soft but his eyes glistening. "It's me, Jun, your brother." The little girl looked up from her notebook, blinking at the sight of her father, suddenly speechless. "Papa, what's wrong?" Jun couldn't find the words. His throat tightened, his chest ached, his mind spun. He had seen Manny on television countless times, larger than life, a hero to millions. But here he was, standing in his humble garage, dressed like an ordinary man, tapping their secret knock as if no time had passed at all. The boss shouted again from the back, "Jun, stop wasting time with customers. Get back to work." But Jun didn't hear him. His eyes were fixed only on Manny. Manny stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on Jun's shoulder. "I never forgot you," he said softly. "Not for a single day." Tears welled in Jun's eyes, though he fought to blink them back. He wanted to say something, anything. but all that came out was a choked laugh. You became everything we dreamed of. And me? Look at me, brother. I'm just a mechanic. Manny shook his head firmly, his grip tightening on Jun's shoulder. No, Jun, you're more than that. You're the reason I believed I could fight. You're the reason I never gave up. Don't ever say you're just anything. Jun swallowed hard, unable to stop the tears now. His daughter, confused but sensing the emotion, came over and held her father's hand. The garage suddenly felt smaller, more intimate, as if the years between them had dissolved in that one moment of recognition. If Manny Pacquiao could find his lost brother in the most unlikely of places, what would he do next to change his life forever? Jun stood frozen, the wrench slipping from his hand and clattering onto the floor. His daughter clung to his side, staring up at the stranger her father had just called Manny. Her wide eyes blinked, confused, but she could sense the gravity of the moment. Manny squeezed Jun's shoulder, then finally turned to face the rest of the garage. He slipped his cap fully off, brushing a hand over his short hair. His face was uncovered now, unmistakable under the harsh fluorescent lights. For a few seconds, silence hung in the air. Mechanics who had been working nearby paused mid-task, their tools dangling in disbelief. "Wait a second," one of them whispered, squinting. "Isn't that—" Another dropped his socket wrench with a loud clang. "That's Manny Pacquiao!" The name spread like a spark through dry leaves. Suddenly, whispers filled the garage. Heads turned, jaws dropped, and in seconds the room erupted with gasps and murmurs. The boss stomped forward, irritated. "What's with all the noise? Get back to—" He stopped mid-sentence when his eyes fell on Manny. His cigarette nearly fell from his lips. No way. Manny looked at him calmly, his stance unshaken. "Yes, it's me." The garage fell completely silent again, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The boss stumbled over his words, his earlier arrogance dissolving into nervous stammers. I didn't know. Senator Pacquiao? Champion Pacquiao?" Manny's voice was steady but carried an unmistakable weight. "To you, I'm not senator or champion, I'm just Manny, and I came here for my brother." The room went still again. Every mechanic's eyes darted between Jun and Manny, confusion mixing with awe. "Brother?" someone echoed. Jun lowered his head, ashamed. He wiped at his eyes with the back of his dirty sleeve. "I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want pity. I didn't want anyone to think I lived off your name." Manny turned to him firmly, his voice rising so everyone could hear. "You are my brother, Jun. Without you, I wouldn't even be here today. Every punch I threw, every round I survived, it was because of what we endured together." The words struck everyone in the room like thunder. The boss, pale and sweating now, opened his mouth to say something, but Manny's eyes locked onto him, calm but sharp as a blade. "You insulted him. You belittled him. You treated him as if he were nothing." Manny's tone was controlled, but the sheer authority in his voice sent shivers down the boss's spine. "Do you even know the kind of man you have here? He's stronger than any of you can imagine." The boss swallowed hard, his arrogance gone. He stammered, I didn't mean—" Manny cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to him." All eyes shifted to Jun. His daughter squeezed his hand tighter, her little face a mixture of pride and fear. Jun stood awkwardly, shoulders hunched, clearly uncomfortable in the sudden spotlight. The boss finally bowed his head. "I'm sorry, Jun. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that." His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Jun didn't respond, still too stunned. Manny, however, gave a small nod. Respect costs nothing, but without it you lose everything. The mechanics around the room murmured in agreement. Some even clapped softly, their admiration for Manny growing not just because of his fame, but because of his humility and fierce loyalty. The little girl tugged on Jun's sleeve. "Papa, is he really—" Jun knelt beside her, tears brimming in his eyes. "Yes, Anak. He's my brother. He's your Uncle Manny." The child's eyes widened, her mouth falling open. She glanced back at Manny shyly, her cheeks flushing. Manny knelt down to her level, his smile warm and gentle. "You must be very proud of your papa," Manny said softly. "He's a good man, a strong man." The girl nodded, tears forming in her eyes too. "Yes, Uncle Manny, he works very hard." Manny's chest tightened. He reached out and gently patted her head, silently promising himself that her life, their life, was about to change forever. The garage was buzzing now, Some workers already pulling out their phones discreetly, capturing the surreal moment. But Manny didn't mind. In fact, he welcomed it. Let the world see this. Let them see where he came from and who he still stood beside. Straightening up, Manny turned back to Jun. You've carried the weight long enough, brother. It's time I carried it with you. Jun shook his head, overwhelmed. Manny, no, you don't owe me anything. You've already done so much for our people. For the Philippines, I don't deserve— Don't say that, Manny interrupted firmly. You deserve everything. You gave me strength when we had nothing. Now it's my turn. The tension in the garage shifted. It was no longer just awe at Manny's presence. It was the dawning realization that they were witnessing something deeper. A reunion of blood and loyalty. A story that went beyond boxing rings and fame. But for the boss, it was a moment of reckoning. He glanced nervously between Manny and Jun, knowing his reputation was hanging by a thread. The man he had disrespected was not just another poor worker. He was the brother of one of the most powerful, respected figures in the world. Manny's final words in that moment echoed like a hammer striking steel. From this day forward, no one disrespects my brother. Not while I'm here, not ever again. The crowd's silence was heavy with respect. The power had shifted completely. Jun was no longer just the mechanic in greasy clothes. In everyone's eyes, he was Manny Pacquiao's brother, and that meant something. But Manny wasn't done yet. Revealing himself was just the beginning. What he did next would change Jun's life forever, and shock everyone in the garage. The garage was still hushed, the weight of Manny's words hanging heavy in the air. Jun stood awkwardly, his greasy hands trembling as if the years of toil and humiliation were suddenly pressing down on him at once. His daughter clung to his leg, looking between her father and her newly revealed uncle with innocent, tearful eyes. The boss fidgeted, his bravado gone. Beads of sweat rolled down his temple as he tried to compose himself. Senator, Mr. Pacquiao, I didn't mean any disrespect. I didn't know— Manny cut him off with a sharp glance. That's the problem. You shouldn't need to know someone's name before you show respect. Every worker here deserves dignity, whether they are my brother or not. The mechanics around the room nodded, some even murmuring in agreement. The boss flushed with embarrassment, realizing his authority was crumbling in front of his own employees. Manny walked slowly around the garage, his hands clasped behind his back, his presence commanding. How many years has Jun worked here? He asked. The boss cleared his throat nervously. About 8 years. And in those 8 years, Manny pressed, his tone calm but firm. Has he ever been late? Has he ever stolen from you? Has he not worked harder than anyone else here? The boss shifted uncomfortably. He's a good worker. One of the best. Manny stopped and faced him directly. Then why does he wear shoes with holes? Why does his daughter sit here waiting for a father who is too exhausted to even smile at the end of the day? Why after 8 years does he still struggle to survive while you profit from his sweat? The garage went silent again. The mechanics looked at their boss with new eyes. Shame, anger, and disappointment all mixing in their expressions. Jun lowered his gaze, ashamed that his hardships were being spoken aloud. But Manny wasn't exposing him to humiliate him. He was exposing the system that kept men like Jun trapped. The boss tried to laugh nervously. Sir, this is just business. Times are hard, you know. Manny's voice sharpened. Business should never come at the cost of a man's dignity. He stepped closer, his eyes unblinking. Here's what will happen. From this day, Jun will no longer be treated as a disposable worker. He will be paid fairly. He will have proper hours, and he will be respected. If you cannot provide that, then I will see to it that this garage closes its doors permanently. Do you understand me? The boss's face turned pale. He nodded quickly, stammering, Yes. Yes, Senator. Of course. The mechanics exchanged glances, awe spreading across their faces. For the first time, they saw power being used not to intimidate, but to protect. Manny turned back to Jun, his tone softening. Brother, you've carried this burden alone for too long. That ends today. Jun's lips quivered, his pride and humility battling within him. Manny, please, you don't need to do this for me. I can endure. Manny shook his head firmly. No, you endured enough for both of us when we were young. You sacrificed so I could rise. Now it's my turn to lift you up. The little girl squeezed Jun's hand tighter, whispering, Papa, "Uncle Manny is like a hero," John finally broke. Tears streamed down his face as he pulled his daughter close. For years he had accepted humiliation, telling himself it was for her sake. But now, standing in the shadow of his brother's protection, he felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. Manny addressed the room one final time. "Let this be a lesson. Never judge a man by his clothes or his station in life. The man you see covered in grease may be the same man who once carried greatness on his shoulders. Respect everyone, not because of who they know, but because of who they are." The garage erupted in applause. Not the polite applause of fans in an arena, but the genuine respect of ordinary people who had just witnessed justice in its purest form. The boss slunk back, humiliated but subdued, knowing his authority had been stripped bare in front of everyone. Manny turned to Jun and his daughter. He placed a hand on Jun's shoulder, his other hand resting lightly on the girl's head. "This is only the beginning. I won't let you struggle anymore. We'll build something better together." But what Manny did next went beyond fixing Jun's job. It wasn't just about justice in the garage. It was about changing his brother's entire life forever. The garage slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the energy inside had transformed completely. Workers moved with renewed spirit, their eyes occasionally flicking toward Manny and Jun as if they were witnessing history itself. The boss kept his head low, avoiding Manny's gaze, too embarrassed to say another word. But for Manny, the world had narrowed to just two people, his brother Jun and the little girl who clutched his hand. He crouched down beside them, meeting the girl at eye level. "What's your name, Anak?" he asked gently. "Maria," she said shyly, hiding behind her father's sleeve. Manny smiled warmly. "Maria, that's a beautiful name." He turned to Jun. "She looks just like her mother." Jun's face softened. He nodded slowly, though his eyes clouded with sadness. "Yes, her mother. She passed away a few years ago. It's just been the two of us since then." Manny's chest tightened. Another burden Jun had carried alone, silently, while he himself had been cheered on in arenas across the world. He reached out, resting his hand firmly on Jun's shoulder. "Not anymore. You won't carry this weight alone ever again." Jun tried to protest, shaking his head. "Manny, please. I don't want charity. I don't want people to think I'm living off you." Manny leaned closer, his voice steady and full of conviction. "This isn't charity. This is family. You gave me strength when we had nothing. You shared your food with me even when you were starving yourself. You told me I would be great one day when no one else believed. Jun, everything I am today I owe to you. This is not about me giving. This is about me repaying what I never could before." Jun's eyes filled again with tears, his body trembling from the flood of emotions. Maria wrapped her small arms around his neck, whispering, "Papa, it's okay. Uncle Manny wants to help." Manny stood and addressed the entire garage, his voice carrying the same commanding presence he once used in the boxing ring. "From today forward, Jun will no longer struggle alone. I will see to it that he has his own shop, his own business, where he can work with dignity and provide for his daughter. And not just that. I will make sure Maria has the best education so she never has to face the same hardships we did." Gasps rippled through the workers. Jun staggered back, overwhelmed. "Manny, that's too much. I can't accept," but Manny stopped him with a firm embrace. The brothers held on to each other, their tears mingling, their hearts finally reunited after years of silence. The entire garage erupted into applause again, not for the champion in the ring, but for the champion of loyalty, of humility, of brotherhood. Maria looked up at her father and uncle, her eyes shining with hope. For the first time in her young life, she believed the future could be brighter. Word spread quickly beyond the garage. By the next morning, the story was all over the news and social media. Manny Pacquiao reunites with his estranged brother, changes his life forever. Clips of the moment Manny revealed himself went viral. Millions watched in awe as he tapped the secret childhood rhythm. As Jun's face transformed from disbelief to recognition, millions more were moved to tears when Manny declared, "Respect costs nothing, but without it you lose everything." Jun's story became more than just a family reunion, it became a symbol. A reminder that no matter how far we rise, we must never forget where we came from, or the people who helped us along the way. In the weeks that followed, Manny kept his word. Papers were signed, funds were arranged, and soon Jun stood proudly in front of his own modest but newly built auto shop. A clean sign hung above the entrance, Jun's Honest Mechanics. The workers from the old garage came to visit, some even asking to join him. Customers poured in, not just because of the Pacquiao name, but because they respected the man behind the grease, a man who had endured hardship with dignity and was finally being given the chance he deserved. Maria skipped happily around the shop, her new schoolbooks in hand, her smile brighter than ever. For her, the future was now wide open, full of promise. And Manny? He visited often, not as a senator, not as a celebrity, but simply as a brother. He would sit in the corner of the shop, watching Jun work with pride, remembering the boy who once patched up his cuts after street fights. One afternoon, as the sun set and the garage lights flickered on, Jun walked over and clasped Manny's hand. "Thank you, brother. Not for the shop, not for the money, but for remembering me, for not letting me disappear." Manny's eyes glistened. He pulled Jun into another embrace. "We started together in poverty, Jun, and we will finish together in dignity." The story closed not just with reunion, but with a universal truth that echoed far beyond that small auto shop. Family is not about blood alone. It's about sacrifice, loyalty, and remembering the hands that lifted you when you were too weak to stand. And to the millions who watched and wept at the story online, Manny left one final message. Never forget the people who stood by you when you had nothing. Because in the end, success means nothing if you cannot share it with those who helped you build it. Weeks turned into months, and Jun's life transformed in ways he had never imagined possible. His modest new auto shop became a cornerstone in the community. The once worn shoes and tattered shirts were replaced with a clean uniform that carried his name proudly embroidered on the chest. Maria, his daughter, skipped off to school each morning with her head held high, her books neatly stacked in her backpack, her eyes filled with dreams she once thought unreachable. But beyond the material changes, it was the respect that mattered most. Customers greeted Jun warmly. Neighbors stopped by just to say hello, and even his old co-workers from the garage treated him like a man renewed. For years, Jun had been invisible, just another face in the grind of survival. Now, thanks to his brother, he stood tall, not as Manny Pacquiao's brother, but as Jun, the honest mechanic who had finally found his rightful place. Manny visited often, sometimes quietly, without cameras or fanfare, just to sit in the shop and talk with Jun. The brothers shared stories of their childhood, laughing at memories of stolen mangoes and barefoot races through the dusty streets. Other times, Manny would bring Maria small gifts, a basketball, a stack of books, a simple necklace for her birthday. But no matter how often he came, Manny always reminded Jun, "This is your shop. This is your victory. I only gave you the tools. You're the one who builds every day with your own hands." The story of their reunion spread far and wide, not because of celebrity gossip, but because of the universal truth it carried. People everywhere were touched by the idea that no amount of fame, money, or power could erase the bond of brotherhood. They saw in Manny not just a champion fighter, but a champion of loyalty. They saw in Jun not just a struggling mechanic, but a symbol of resilience, proof that even those who live in the shadows can shine again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with orange and gold, Jun sat outside his shop with Manny. Maria played nearby, laughing as she chased a stray puppy. Jun looked at his brother and said quietly, "You know, for a long time I thought I was forgotten. I thought poverty had swallowed me whole, that my story ended here in grease and sweat. But then you came, and you reminded me that no one is truly forgotten when they are loved." Manny's eyes softened. "Jun, I never forgot you. Not for a single fight, not for a single speech, not for a single day. You were always in my heart. That's what family is. Even when the world separates us, blood and love keep us tied." Jun nodded slowly, his heart lighter than it had been in decades. He looked at Maria, her laughter filling the air, and felt peace wash over him. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a promise. The moral of their story wasn't just for them. It was for everyone who had ever been left behind, everyone who had ever felt invisible. It whispered, "Success means nothing if you forget the people who carried you in your weakest days. True greatness isn't about titles or wealth. It's about lifting others when they fall. and remembering those who once lifted you. As the evening breeze carried the scent of oil and fresh paint from the new shop, Manny placed an arm around June's shoulders and spoke the words that would forever define their reunion. Brothers in struggle. Brothers in victory, always. The world may have known Manny Pacquiao as a fighter, but in that quiet corner of the Philippines, the truest fight had already been won, the fight for dignity, family, and unbreakable love. And for everyone who watched their story unfold online, the call was simple. Never let pride or distance make you forget the people who gave you strength. If you agree, type brotherhood in the comments, and share this story so no one forgets the power of family.